Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Breakfast and Learn of November. And welcome, Laszlo, to our session. I will introduce you in a
Thank
minute.
you.
But first, as always, we will share a little bit about our network, about the TechSam network, and why we are here today. And then we will start with the session that's interesting for all of us. So we are the TechSam network. We are a network that brings together research groups in Catalonia that are doing research specifically in mental health and with a technological scope. We are a project that is led from Parc Sanitari Sant Joan de Déu and Fundació de Recerca Sant Joan de Déu, and which is funded by Generalitat de Catalunya. Our goal is to bring all the research results and all the knowledge that is generated in the research and innovation sphere, specifically in mental health and technology, closer to public and private entities, and specifically closer to society and to people affected by mental health problems. On the other hand, we also try to keep an eye on the needs of these public and private entities and also on the needs of the people in order to bring all this information back to the researchers and to the innovators in order to create more innovation that's actually based on needs. So in this kind of flow and this kind of conversations that we want to create, we have involved, now it's already almost 60 research groups from more than 20 institutions in Catalonia, including research centers, universities, and also hospitals and foundations. And next month, we're going to have our following Breakfast and Learn together with the Support Office for Life Science and Health in Northern Sweden. In here, we will hear about more success stories, such as the one that we're going to hear today, but international ones, and how is this ecosystem in innovation, and specifically in the area of mental health, working nowadays, and how can we create collaborations and also joint opportunities from Catalonia and Spain to Northern Sweden. And today, we're here to talk about another case study, which is the Braingaze case. We have with us Laszlo Bax, who is the CEO and co-founder of Braingaze. And to let you know a little bit more about Laszlo, I can tell you that he graduated as an industrial design engineer at the Delft University of Technology in 1991. And for the first 10 years of his career, he worked as a new business creation consultant for both the government and industry clients. And in 1991, he founded his first business. It was a home care nurse communication company, which was later acquired. And in 2002, he founded Bax and Company in Barcelona, which was an innovation consultancy business. And in 2013, he founded Braingaze together with an IKEA research partner who is Hans Super. As you will learn from Laszlo, Braingaze develops a cognitive health solution that leverages a biomarker of cognitive attention modulation based on involuntary small eye movements. Excuse me for that, but I couldn't understand my own handwriting. So if you can explain it in more detail, that would be greatly appreciated. So thank you so much, Laszlo, for joining us today and for sharing with us not only what Braingaze is about, but also the main challenges and learnings that you had done for the last 11 years. We are really eager to know about what you learned through this process of creating and bringing to life a spin-off, and also regarding the internationalization of this company. So the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Iris, and thank you the entire TechSam team for offering the opportunity to kind of share a bit of our journey. You know, when you we first discussed the possibility to do this talk, you framed it as a success story. And although we've been around for 11 years, I still think it's a bit early to to say that because I'm not sitting on a boat yet. So I thought it would be better to just focus on what we've learned and also maybe to emphasize that what is maybe the most important is to enjoy the ride. So we're on a journey, we're still on that journey, and it's actually quite fun to develop a business and to make it grow and prosper. So I hope there's something interesting from my experience in this company so far. I hope we will create new experiences in the future, maybe together with Texam. It would be nice. Yeah, maybe also apologies for this being in English. I think it is probably the most universally known language across Texam. In the Q&A, if you want to switch to Spanish, then that would not be a problem, or Dutch, of course. But okay, that might be a little bit more problematic for the rest. So yeah, we've already been around as Braingaze for about 11 years. We are at the moment still located in the Techno Campus in Mataró, but we also opened earlier this year an office in London. Now I'll get back to that in more detail later on. So first, just to kind of emphasize one thing, I also thought, okay, the picture that was actually on the invitation was I realized it must have been at least 10 years old. So this is what I look like now if you take a picture. So I've aged a bit in those 11 years. I think Hans's picture is still old though, so I'll take a new picture of him next time we have a talk. But yeah, basically Braingaze is driven by two founders. Hans, the neurobiologist, the scientist, me, the entrepreneur, designer, engineer, manager, maybe. So yeah, and I think it is very fundamentally a nicer journey if you do it alone, right? If you don't do it alone, I mean. So I would very much recommend anybody who thinks about setting up and growing a company to find a travel companion or two, because it's just a lot more enjoyable, and also the statistics show it's more successful. So I would say kudos to Hans for picking me for that journey, because I do think he's the unique brain, whereas my skills are maybe a little bit more universally found across entrepreneurs. I think there's only very few people in the world that have the knowledge that Hans has on the specific area of neurobiomarkers related to eye movements. So yeah, maybe just a little bit more about our background. I think you already kind of nicely summarized it in the intro talk. So I studied industrial design engineering at Delft University of Technology. That is actually something in the middle of being a real product designer, so semi-artistic, you could say, but also very much rooted in engineering and science. Kind of prepares you to be an innovator, I think. So that's what I did. I wasn't very good at drawing or sketching, so let's say making physical products, designing cars, that was not my thing. So I basically set out to design businesses and try to shape them and grow them. First 10 years in Holland, and then basically I basically created the Spanish office of the Dutch consultancy company, and we first called that Willems and van den Wildenberg España. That was a tongue breaker in Spanish. Buenos dias, Willems y van den Wildenberg. So that didn't work. So we kind of thought, okay, my last name is actually quite easy to pronounce, Bax. So let's relabel. So we changed that to Bax and Company, and yeah, that was something that gradually grew. So we started in 2002. I left the company in 2023, so close to 20 years. One of the things I'm quite proud of is that we grew that company together with a team of people, of course, from 1 to 75 professionals. Really one of the driving innovation consultancies, I think. Well, definitely in Barcelona, but also far beyond. I think 90% of the turnover still comes from outside of Spain, actually. It's recently been rebranded, so now the company is also gone. So I think it's now just Bax. And like I said, I'm no longer involved, but I'm still very proud of what they're doing. And when I left the company, I also kind of made up a calculation of, okay, what are the things I accomplished? apart from growing a company with, I would say, some very highly qualified professionals who are also very much enjoying their work, I think, also very important. But I also realized that I actually raised around 900 million of euros for innovation alliances. And that was all over the place. So healthcare, but also energy, cars, buildings, creative industry, culture, virtual reality. So you basically, it was a very interesting opportunity to be a consultancy company in this innovation space, because you really touch upon all kinds of fields that are really interesting. So it's very universal, deep tech experience to do that for a number of years. And yeah, over those decades, I worked for many of, I would say, Europe's most innovative corporates, but also SMEs, and also a lot of academics, actually, to universities and other research groups, and especially making the three categories maybe work together. And then, like Iris already mentioned, in 2013, I met, I met Hans already a few years before, but we chatted over a typical Catalan barbecue, and he told me about his neuro marker for ADHD. And we basically decided right there and then that this would be a great subject to set up a company around. It still took quite a long time to then incorporate the company, but that is how Braingaze got started, actually. Yeah, I think that's a bit about my travels or my journey so far. Like I said, I covered many sectors, but I actually started out, my first project I did as a consultant was about remote ECG, so electrocardiograms, basically with a modem, still a dial-up modem, and there's little noises made by the telephone to transmit the signal. The other company I set up that Iris mentioned, the home care back office connection company, used this antiquated device, the iPack, to connect nurses, home care nurses, with their back office, that we set up in 1999. So it was also home, so healthcare. And then, yeah, basically since 2013 with Braingaze, using eye tracking, also sometimes eye tracking in VR headsets. So always kind of weaving in and out of health tech. That's been my experience. So maybe just trying to start out with what's the vision of Braingaze? What do we want to accomplish in this world? And basically, we want to create great neurocognitive healthcare for all. So for it to be accessible for everybody, for it to be pleasant, high quality, affordable, and basically trying to improve the quality and the efficiency of patient journeys, but also clinician journeys. So this is what we set out to do. And then, so that's maybe you have a vision, but of course then you need to kind of deliver on the vision. How do you do that? With products, ultimately that are solutions to certain challenges, and we leverage, in our case, very much science to make that happen. So a little bit more about the actual products that we have. And so one of basically the thing we started out with is a diagnostic test for ADHD. This uses an eye tracker. It presents a fairly simple visual task that the child performs. And while the child performs this task, you measure these eye movements. Subsequently, we use machine learning algorithms to interpret the patterns of these eye movements. And these algorithms then basically classify between basically they attach a probability of suffering from ADHD, and they attach likely severity of that ADHD, and they also give an indication of what kind of ADHD. Is it mainly inattentive, mainly hyperactive, or is it the combined type? So we've started out with ADHD. It turns out that the biomarker actually is quite universally reflecting cognitive processing in the brain. So depending on what kind of visual task you present, you can use it to detect a variety of neurodevelopmental disorders. So not only ADHD, we've also created quite a bit of evidence around detecting autism, autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and also in dyslexia. So this is quite relevant because increasingly in, let's say, child mental health, people are no longer just referred for one single diagnosis. They are referred for, let's say, more holistic exploration, and also had more recent definitions of mental health, especially this particular area of mental health, increasingly recognize that a lot of people, children, actually can suffer from a combination of ADHD, ASD, sometimes also dyslexia. So this is maybe a general, you could say, macro trend that also Braingaze is trying to respond to by offering a broader range of tests and not only the ADHD test. So what eye movement are we particularly looking at? We've called that cognitive vergence. So vergence is in general just the eyes moving towards the tip of your nose. Convergence, the divergence would be going out. This is not, normally you do this to kind of look into the three-dimensional space, so to focus your eyes in the distance. But basically what Hans discovered is that you make a very small involuntary click, so to speak, where the two eyes go a little bit into each other, if you cognitively process certain information. And that particular response or pattern is distorted, is different if you suffer from a specific cognitive disorder. And basically by varying the kind of visual tasks you get, you can use that to detect a variety of things, but all of them related to this particular change in the angle between the left and the right eye gaze path. So why is that something that works? Well, it's still something Hans is doing more fundamental research on, but fundamentally, the most likely explanation is that both the eye movement control and cognitive processing take place to a large extent in the locus coeruleus inside the brainstem. And that's exactly where we see basically the differences in eye movement patterns stem from differences in the structure of the locus coeruleus. This actually, this realization that this is something that is probably neurobiologically located in this nucleus has also led us to actually explore the opposite of detecting neurocognitive issues. We've also used this mechanism the other way around, so to offer video games that you control with your eye movement to actually train the locus coeruleus, so to speak, and therefore reduce symptoms. So it turns out that this is not only a biomarker, it's also a vector for therapeutics, digital therapeutics. And I'll get into that a little bit later on, but this is, let's say, the neurobiological pattern or circuits behind the answer to why does this work. But this is just some scientific information, which is, let's say, the initial scientific results where you see the difference between angle. So this is all plotting the angle between the left and the right eye over time. So you can see the difference between something that is attended versus to something that is not attended in healthy subjects. You can also ask people later, did you see this or did you see that? And with our system, where you can actually predict if they have seen it, consciously seen it. You can also detect and predict if people will remember or will not remember a certain thing. And this is actually something that we're exploiting in another application that we have developed, which is using our biomarker to detect early stages of Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment. So basically, depending on what kind of stimulus you give, like I said, you can detect a variety of cognitive issues. So this is a little bit more about the treatment side. So the reverse, if you train this eye movement and the attention circuits around it, do you actually get the effect? It turns out that you do. This is basically some indications of how digital treatment changes things in subjects. And we compared it to how psychostimulants, especially Ritalin-like medication for ADHD. So what you see is that both this vergence movement actually, if you're untreated, it's not getting better. If you do digital treatment, then it does get better. If you look at psychostimulants, then also vergence is actually something that is quite positively affected. And same goes for pupil response. So this kind of suggests that there might be some similarity in how digital treatment works versus how psychostimulants work. And again, so this is a little bit more about how our classifier detects from ADHD clinical controls or healthy controls. Basically, it compares the patterns of angle between left and right eye plotted over time. You can see here the typical, the blue and the red is the difference between a no cue situation. So this is where the subject is hinted where a certain stimulus might appear or not. The cue is when you get that hint. The no cue is when you do not get that hint. But you can see in both cases, healthy controls have this basically quick fluctuation in eye angle difference. Clinical controls already have it less, and ADHD patients have hardly any fluctuation. And so that pattern there is really not very well developed. And basically our machine learning classifiers use this to identify between the three cases. So all of this we did not do alone. We have collaborated with a lot of different clinical and non-clinical scientists all over Europe. Of course, most of all, I realized that we didn't even put the logo on it, but of course, most of the work has been done in collaboration with the University of Barcelona. And in general, they deserve a big place on this slide, and I will definitely add them. But these slides, I must admit, they have been mainly created to present towards a UK audience. So that's why we've kind of focused on the UK logos here. But besides that, there is, of course, a huge amount of collaboration that has been going on in Barcelona. And it is, for us, still, I would say, the scientific hub where we do most of our collaborative research. In total now, some 2,000 subjects have been involved in over 20 clinical studies. Also, of course, a lot of non-clinical work. And I think I'll get back to this, but nobody can build a company on their own, and collaborations are absolutely key to make these things grow from, let's say, interesting science to initial seed company to growth company. Just maybe a very specific journey, also to maybe illustrate it, because one thing is the logos, but this is maybe a little bit more the time. I'm sure that for many of you, this is not strange, but you've been there yourself maybe, or you have heard about it. But these are very long trajectories of research that can start out with a very initial investigative thing, but can then move on to the next project and move on to the next project, move on to it. So you basically build a kind of a train of research projects. There can be variations in the partners that you collaborate with. So in this case, we started out very much with the University of Barcelona. We then kind of increased the collaboration with some clinical groups in the neighborhood, you could say. We've then subsequently started collaborating with a big group in New York, which was led by one of the global key opinion leaders, Steve Farron. We then ran into people at the University of Nottingham, which were very important in the UK market, and basically one of the leading groups in looking at digital health or digital solutions for mental health in the UK. And yeah, we're now, as we have raised funding from the venture capitalists in London, we're especially building further collaborations in the UK. So basically, this is how the science gradually grows from very fundamental to more and more applied and more pushing towards something that is accepted and has been demonstrated to work in clinical reality. These can be very, very long trajectories. And I think actually one of the things to get right in setting up a company, let's say a spin-off from university research, and to build that company is actually to make the smart decision on timing the creation of that company. So it shouldn't be too soon. It shouldn't be too late. You have to get it right. I'll get into that a little bit more. It's one of the key learnings, I think, from developing businesses and having them grow. Timing is such an important, maybe one of the most important things to take the right decisions about. And also, it's one of the things that can basically make your project unviable if you get it wrong. So, yeah, I think I've already explained quite a bit what the test is about. I won't go into that. What we also actually did when we started out, we were completely, let's say, in love with our biomarker test. When we got more and more into dialogue with clinicians, we more and more realized that even though a biomarker can be an objective support to a diagnosis, especially in the cases of ADHD and other similar neurodevelopmental disorders, there is always a clinician involved, and the clinician must look at symptoms. Basically, the definition of the disorder requires symptoms to be taken into account. So what we have done ever since those early days of focusing completely on our biomarker is to try to complement our biomarker with stuff that the clinician needs. So you can see us, you look back over time, you can see us starting out typical in love with tech, patented technology. This is great. This will alone change the world, towards an attitude where we're much more in dialogue with clinicians, trying to understand, okay, what do you need and how can we be a solution provider to what you need? Using our biomarker, but also using other stuff. So in our case, one of the things people use is rating scales to get more insight into when and how symptoms are manifest. And basically, we added this to our system to make it much easier and much faster to get to a final diagnosis. So I think this is also maybe to some extent universally applicable. In most cases, people are looking for a complete solution. This might not be what you initially have developed, so then you'd better think about what a complete solution looks like, and either you develop it yourself or you compose it together with others. That's, of course, also a possibility. So our report tries to be something that summarizes the main things that a doctor talks about when talking through with the patient or with the parents of the patient. So we spent quite a bit of time on designing the report, making sure that people really understand it. We involve users, so we involve patients, we involve clinicians themselves, trying to make sure that what the report, how it looks, what it transmits, actually aligns very well with the way that the clinician tells the story to the patient. Because in the end, again, when you really think about how our solution sits into the clinical reality, that's where it can either be adopted or it can be rejected. And it might not be because of the core science, it might be because it just doesn't match with how people explain a certain disorder to the parents. So we spent quite a bit of time on this, and I think that's also where we now get a lot of appreciation from. When we present this to the UK market, one of the things they like is that the way we present data very nicely aligns with the way they work. So I think that's also something to really keep in mind whenever you're developing your company, you're developing your solutions. How does it fit into clinical reality and clinical workflows? So a little bit more about these reports. As you can see, it's trying to be graphic, but also data-driven. Another thing which is essential, I would say, in medical markets, regulatory compliance, and most people will admit it's not their favorite subject. There's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of forms, there's a lot of signatures that need to be set. But in the end, of course, it's quite logical. We are dealing here with some very serious tools that are being used to take very life-affecting decisions. So it's quite normal that we need to comply with all this. Maybe to just highlight that apart from, let's say, the medical regulations that have been already in place for decades, I would say, although they are also evolving, and there's especially also this transition from MDD to MDR in Europe, which kind of puts an extra layer of requirements on any company that wants to do diagnostics. There's also, I would say, the increasing attention to cybersecurity, privacy. So especially in the UK, this is a very, very sensitive topic. So we spend a lot of time, especially this year, on making sure that all our solutions are also compliant with all the battery of cybersecurity, digital security, IT compatibility that the NHS is requiring from us to be able to use our systems in their clinical reality. So I won't go into that in more detail, but if you have questions later on, we can touch upon it in more detail in the Q&A. Yeah, maybe like I mentioned, so product development actually really never stops. I think that's also something to kind of just realize and not be too concerned about. And initially, when we designed and developed our diagnostic test, we thought, okay, now we have it, now we put it on the market, and then everybody's going to buy it, and we can almost get rid of the product development people in our team. The reality is different. People constantly come up with additional questions, additional ideas, and that would be great, but could you also do this? And you have to really continue to evolve your product. The world doesn't stand still, so if you don't, you will be basically become obsolete in a matter of years, because others will do it, and if you don't, you will basically lose terrain comparatively to what the rest of the world is up to. So we developed, like I said, because we noticed an increasing need for a holistic exploration, we developed especially into beyond ADHD to ASD, and then also the dyslexia test, which again uses the same biomarker, but in this case with a word recognition task. And then, so the last, let's say, last frontier that we are now exploring and pushing is the therapeutic games. So initially we created games that required this hardware piece, the eye tracker. In our diagnostic systems, that's still very much necessary because it's the only way to get the precise eye movements that we need for diagnosis. For therapeutics, you can use slightly less accurate eye tracking, and this has led us to develop therapeutic games that you play on a mobile phone or on a tablet, where you use the selfie cam as the eye tracker. And the main reason for doing this is that you offer the possibility to have patients download it on their own phone, so it can work on iOS, so on Apple, but also on Android phones. And of course, that tremendously opens up the access of such solutions. Everyone in the world who has an iPhone or an Android phone can download these games and can basically train aspects of symptoms of ADHD. So we've done initial validation. We're basically now setting up larger validation, both in Spain, but also in the UK. The initial validation looks really promising, some 56% reduction in some of the key symptoms. But of course, we still need to do more. This is now also something that we will get covered by a CE mark as a class 1 medical device. But we have very high expectations from the therapeutic games because of this, let's say, low threshold to actually try out and adopt them. So this is a bit the overview. So you can say we have on one hand a portfolio of stuff around diagnosis. All of that at the moment uses the dedicated eye tracker. We have I mentioned ADHD, which is on the market already for a couple of years. Autism and dyslexia, we are getting close to offering that as a comorbidity check, as a standalone diagnostic test. We're still, I think, a little bit further away from getting that CE marked. And then we have, like I said, also done quite some work on Alzheimer's. And in therapy, actually, the similar disorders can also be addressed using a variety of therapeutic games. So all that is a bit of what do we have now, or what we did, what are the products, what company. But I realized that, yeah, this talk was about actually learning some stuff about what we have, why we did it, and what we could do better. So I'll try to summarize a bit the things that, looking back, we've learned, and what I would recommend maybe to those that are considering to go into a similar route. So I think one thing to emphasize is that you always need money, and you always run out of money, and then you always need to attract new money. Science is expensive, product development is expensive, regulatory compliance is expensive. All of these things require abundant cash, and you will need to basically leverage all and every source you can think of to make it all patched together to a viable route. And I think that's something where Braingaze has been quite resilient. We have gone through boom times of digital health, but also bust times of digital health. At the moment, we're again actually in a time when it's quite hard to raise investment for digital health solutions. And that was easier when just around COVID and post-COVID. So basically, I think it's really important to keep in mind all these possibilities and make sure that you try to have connections and are juggling, let's say, somehow opportunities to pursue each and every one of them. So in our case, we used at a very, very early stage the Neotech program to get the first couple of 100,000 in. We combined that with crowdfunding round, very, very initial. We did a slightly bigger crowdfunding round with Capital Cell in 2016. In 1999, 2020, we joined China Accelerator, exploring opportunities in China, which also led to convertible loan financing. In 2023, we actually signed a licensing deal with an American company called Tris that generated cash, because basically around a licensing deal, companies normally pay milestone payments, upfront payments. So there's a range of payments that you get from that. And then between January and February of this year, we signed the investment by Rise, which is a company that runs a dedicated digital health fund in London. And it's specialized in companies like ours, which are heavy on the science, but maybe have lacked connections to the biggest markets in the world to kind of scale their technology. And together with Rise, we are now working very hard to get our technologies into the UK market, and from there then also into the US. But I would say, core learning, you will need all of this, and you better get used to, if you're the co-founder, you will spend a lot of time arranging, and securing this kind of sources of funds. You spend a lot of time also thinking about products, solutions. Will I pivot? Will I not pivot? And there's always this balance between sticking to the product that you originally had versus moving on to the next thing that's also really attractive. So as a company, Braingaze, I think if you would have to position us, then we err on the side of wanting to do too many things at once. So, I mean, I haven't met an investor who hasn't told me to focus more. On the other hand, the variety of assets that we have in our portfolio also allows us to address a variety of problems, a number of use cases. And I think ultimately, so for us, what has been a very fundamental decision is do we pivot from only doing diagnosis towards also offering therapy? I think the decision to go that therapeutic route has been crucial and has been one of the key drivers for having the right valuation and also the potential for increased valuation to raise money from venture capitalists. So you have to have an open mind about changing your game. You have to have sufficient stamina and insistence to, and there has to be some hyena blood in you in the sense of keeping on when it's getting tough. But on the other hand, you do need to kind of switch to changing market conditions or to opportunities that present themselves. So having an open mind to pivot while still being sufficiently consistent in what you originally set out, I think that's also one of the big challenges of a good entrepreneur. IP protection, of course, it's crucial. It's also a bit of a pain in the neck because it makes you need capital relatively early on in your journey. So again, very important to time your protection of IP smartly and to not always choose patents. There's stuff beyond patents that you can do to protect your IP that might be more cost effective and might be in all realism more enforceable than trying to battle yourself with a big corporate in Japan because they're infringing your patent. If that happens, there's really not a lot you can do about it anyway. But it is something that, especially by, I would say, VC investors, is considered crucial to consider your value to be more than just 10 times your turnover or something like that. So I would also say co-create. I think that's these days quite generally accepted, but we have received a lot of positive feedback on how our systems work in everyday practice. And I think the credit for that goes to the people we co-created with, which has been people from San Juan de Deu, but also Hospital Clinic, Vall d'Hebron, people at King's College. So try to have a mixed group of people and do not assume that you know how reality works, because you probably know your reality, but not that of a larger market. One thing I also already touched upon, your product never lives alone. It's part of a process, it's part of a journey. Try to really make sure that you fully understand this journey, because if you don't, you won't be able to create a product that fits into it. Or there will be a reason not to adopt your product that is not even related to your specific product, but how it interacts with the total workflow. Redesign service pathways. We're now spending a lot of time together with NHS Trust, and I don't even expect you to look into the text boxes here, but we spend a lot of time on Miro boards, redesigning the whole journey of, okay, there was once upon a time, there was a kid at school, and that kid at school had a problem with learning, and now, okay, and what really happens, and how much of that whole journey is at school, and how much is actually at the medical professional institution, and how much then takes place again at the school or at home. So we spend a lot of time not designing our product, but designing the service pathway around it. And I think that's also increasingly going to be the case for any digital health company that wants to really embed their solutions into clinical practice or beyond clinical practice, let's say. Build a team and manage them. I think that's also a thing to really keep in mind. You will need to grow beyond the founder group. You will need to put together a team. Again, really tough challenge. You have to be consistent enough to not hire and fire on a whim, but you also need to be tough enough to take tough decisions when it's needed. You have to really make sure that you manage and inspire and motivate that team. It's not a given that everybody in your team has the same attitude as the founders. So if you're yourself not a good team builder or team manager, then again, that would be a reason to kind of look for somebody who is. Yeah, I think licensing, I mentioned it as a way to get short-term cash, but it's also actually probably the way to get long-term growth. There's a lot of markets out there in the world, and you probably can't touch all of them alone. So as soon as you have something which has a proven track record in any market, you can present that, package it, and see if there's somebody else who wants to basically repeat your trick, but in another geography. And that's it makes a lot of business sense. It makes you look bigger than you actually are. And like I said, it creates cash coming in both short term and longer term. Track the competition. So I would say, constantly almost making this kind of graphs where I look at who else is new now. So this is a graph for ADHD therapeutics, trying to really also not just cover the ones that are directly competing with me, which would be therapeutic games on a mobile phone, but also things like Monarch, which is a stimulation of a nerve in the brain with an electrode attached to the head, but ultimately provides the same function as what we're trying to solve here. Yeah, address a real and acute challenge. I think something we probably didn't get right the first time. So in 2013, 2014, when we developed our biomarker test for ADHD, I don't think we spent enough time to really assess whether or not that was an urgent need or it was a nice to have. I think in 2013, it probably was a nice to have. Now in the UK, there's a terrible emergency with growing numbers of people on waiting lists. Some people need to wait for 8 years to get an ADHD diagnosis. So now in the UK, there's an urgency, and you can see that is such a difference in presenting your solution. So I think try to find that urgency, that acute challenge. You should be seen as a savior by the market that you're addressing. Not like, oh yeah, that would be nice, or because you will have to kind of push your solution through against a lot of reasons not to change existing situations. Okay, those were a few things I would say, general recommendations, and then I'll wrap up with a couple of lessons learned. If Iris, I can still spend the time. I'll try to keep it short.
Yeah, just if you can wrap it up in a couple of minutes, then we can squeeze in some questions.
Yeah. So,
thank you.
I hinted already before, timing. It's going to be the hardest thing you will need to decide along the way. And it's the hardest to get right. When do you apply for a patent? When do you incorporate your company? I would say in both cases, don't do it too soon, because both of them have, let's say, their curve of tension. If you apply for a patent, national, then within quite a short time, you'll need to expand. It'll cost you 50,000 euros. If you don't have those 50,000 euros, you basically killed your IP, because then you've published it and you have a patent in Spain. So basically you killed it. If you incorporate the company and you wait too long to actually make things happen and raise cash and get that company to really stand and walk, you're gonna basically burn the momentum of the company. So hiring employees, but also firing employees, I touched upon that very briefly before. In juggling money, when to pay that invoice that you actually should have paid 6 months ago and you left it there. Now you have to know when to pay it, also when to send that invoice, when you have only a few clients and you don't want to make them mad, but you still need their cash. So timing will be one of the hardest things to get right. And for me, it's still the thing that keeps me awake most at night, is getting timing right. I think related a bit to that is you will need to juggle options. There's a lot of talk about decades ago, people talked a lot in innovation management about option theory. I do think entrepreneurship is about creating options and keeping them alive without necessarily already doing them. And so a very simple example could be that if you know you need to hire a country manager for Germany, then ideally you know 3 people that want to have that job, but that you don't need to decide now. You can decide now, or in a month, or in 2 months, or in 3 months. So you can juggle that option and keep it there until the final best moment comes to hire a German country manager. And if you don't do that, then you will decide you need a country manager, then start recruiting, then start talking. and then it will take too long. So the thing is to really prepare options so that they are ready when you need them. And that is something that requires really to juggle with expectations of people. It means doing some work before, but not completely doing all the work before you get to that decision. And this is applicable to, I would say, many things. It's hiring, it's partnering, it's signing licensing deals, anything. So creating options will be, again, what you spend a lot of time on. Customer often doesn't know best. Well, I think that's not a big surprise, but we have heard many times people saying, I want this or I want that, and then later finding out that the market actually doesn't agree, and products that do something else are more successful. This is, of course, the classic example of iPhone and BlackBerry. This guy said it, it's not the customer's job to know what they want. It's your job. But you do need to listen to them, but you need to listen to a lot of them, and you need to add your own creativity to see what you think will be what they want in the future. And then I think the last one, cultivate alliances and cultivate your allies. Make sure that you get support everywhere you need it. You will need them. You will need a lot of allies, and you will need them to allow you space and to kind of make up for the shortcomings that you might have. We have had so many people helping us over the last 10, 11 years. And without that help, we would have been bankrupt 10 times over, I think. People from Fundación Bossi Jim Pera, but also from clinics, from funders, from our team itself. So basically, be nice and appreciate what all these others are doing for you. You will need them. Anybody who thinks that they can do it alone, I think, yeah, I mean, every once in a blue moon that will happen, but most of us will need a lot of help from others. And with that, I would conclude, and we can jump into Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laszlo. While the audience keeps thinking about questions, I will read the two that we have on the chat. They are regarding the product, so I think we can talk about this fast. So Rosa Maria asks, good morning. Always 12 minutes test, no more time. Why? Congratulations. And then Eva Frigola says, not sure if I have understood it right. So the eye movement track is included in the therapeutic games, activating the camera of the mobile phone or the computer?
Yeah, so for the first one, basically the test that we do is a very short visual task that is repeated a lot of times. So it actually is about 10, 12 seconds per visual task, and we repeat that 100, 120 times. So in total, that leads to a 12-minute test for ADHD. If you want to add autism, it would be another 10, 12 minutes with a different task. Again, repeating that about 100 times. And for dyslexia, the same thing. In some cases, you could also reduce the amount of repetitions. You could say, okay, we don't need 120. We can do with 60, 70. We think the 120 is a good compromise between how long it takes and the quality of the assessment. So normally we would want that to be 12 minutes, but if you make another trade-off on accuracy versus speed, you could make it shorter. You could make it 5 minutes, 6 minutes. So that's about the diagnostic testing time. So in the therapeutics, yes, we activate the selfie cam. The selfie cam tracks the eye movements with algorithms. We have our own algorithms, but we also use SDKs. So basically layers of external partners that have developed selfie cam eye tracking. So there's a variety of options there. Depends also a little bit on if you want it to be purely therapeutic or if you want the mobile game to be diagnostic. That's actually something that's in our roadmap, but it's a little bit further away. But for the therapeutic game, yeah, the selfie cam registers the eye movements. And actually, the thing to do right is to design the game in such a way that you don't need a huge accuracy of the eye tracking. Because selfie cam eye tracking will always be less accurate than eye tracking with a dedicated device.
Thank you, Laszlo. So Xavier, go ahead.
Hello, can you listen to me?
Yes. Oh,
yeah.
Now.
Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. I would like to ask one question. I have recently been into a conference, a digital therapeutics conference, and there was a panel, and the panelists were mostly CEO developers of digital therapeutic solution for mental health. They explained, they agreed that there was a lot of enthusiasm and interest in the past 5-10 years ago on these therapeutics, and there was a lot of private money poured into a digital therapeutics company, but they told us that we are nowadays living a kind of deception phase. And one of the main ideas is that this solution work, but patients do not use it. So private investors are no longer investing into this field. Do you agree with that?
I think, let's say the macro trend is definitely there. I mentioned it, the boom and bust of digital health and then digital therapeutics, probably most of all, is a reality. And so there were extreme amounts of money poured into digital therapeutics, up to a couple of years ago, last couple of years, and also as we speak today, the amount of money going into digital therapeutics is much, much less. So yeah, I would on the market trend, I would agree. I would also agree on the key importance that was probably underestimated of adherence. If a person plays a game once or twice, that will not have a lasting effect on the symptoms. I think in general, the effect sizes that some players presented were not terribly good. So they were just very modest effect sizes. So in that case, yeah, just also the clinical evidence that was presented already showed that the effects were not that great. I think people have kind of woken up that, okay, if you want to actually ask for money, then it needs to have a decent side of effect. I think the other thing that was missing for a long time was reimbursement. So, for example, in the US, there was no specific reimbursement for digital therapeutics. That will change from January 2025. There's now 3 reimbursement codes expected to be coming into force from the next year onwards that will allow medical professionals to ask money for explaining the app, for monitoring the impact of the app, and also for the app itself. So that will make a big difference for the US market. US is always, I think, one of the leading markets that then changes how the climate of investment changes. But yeah, I would say we are now looking at, in Europe, you have the DIGA framework, which creates reimbursement for digital therapeutics. In France, there's the PECAM digital therapeutics framework, very similar to DIGA. So we are looking very closely at these options. We're also looking together with NHS actually on the therapeutics, not as, let's say, the final direct alternative to medication, but more as something that you can offer to people that are on a waiting list to be diagnosed. So before they're formally diagnosed. And that is actually, I think, a new use case, which has a lot of potential in those particular cases where there are a lot of people on a waiting list. And I would say that in the UK is a very extreme emergency, you could say. But yesterday I was talking to someone in the American market who basically told me the same thing is happening with pediatric mental health in the US. Basically, the lists are growing. There's not enough professionals to answer the need that's there until people are properly diagnosed. You can't give them pharmaceutical treatment. what is there that could at least alleviate those problems. And again, that was something that wasn't really reimbursed before, but now people are also looking at, okay, that might be something that payers want to reimburse because the waiting lists are doing a lot of damage into their healthcare system.
Okay, let me just jump in for a
Thank you
second.
very much.
So the hour is finished, but if someone needs to leave, please do. The session is being recorded, but if Laszlo doesn't mind, we can stay for a couple more minutes because we still have 3 questions to be answered. Is that okay, Laszlo?
Yeah, I could say a few minutes more. Yeah,
Okay.
then I need to actually go to the airport.
Okay, then we will try to make it short. So, Matt, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Laszlo, for a very interesting journey and a very interesting speech. I was curious about the cybersecurity that you talked about. Did you use a partner when you try to comply with the demands? And the one other question is there a difference between UK and Spain in that respect? And I can also add that in Sweden we have the waiting lists as well, so you have a market in Sweden as well.
Okay, yeah, there's a big competitor of ours in Sweden, so I think that would be a hard market for us to crack. But yeah, so cybersecurity, we did work with someone, so not so much a company or a consultancy, but a specific freelance person who had done cybersecurity for digital health companies right prior to working for us. And yes, it is, I would say, different in the UK compared to Spain, Europe. I think the UK already had pre-Brexit, they had some of their specific requirements. I think UK, where NHS plays such a crucial role in healthcare, and it is a bit of a megalith, but on the other hand, also still broken up into many different ones. So there is a bunch of specific guidelines, checklists that you need to comply with. And yeah, I would definitely recommend to do that with somebody who's been there before. If you do that on your own, you'll spend a lot of time, especially also working out what you really need to comply with and what you might be able to ignore until you get a contract in. Again, timing. There's some stuff you need to get in place before you sign a contract. There's some stuff you can get in place after you sign a contract. And again, you need to make a wise decision not to overspend before you need to.
Thank you, Laszlo. Thank you much for the question. I think Maria Lamarca had the hand raised before. I don't know if her question was already answered.
Yeah, it's okay. I think the question might take a bit too long to answer because it's about medical devices. So let's leave it for another time.
Okay, well, thank
Yeah.
you, Maria. Maybe you can send it through the chat and we can share it with Laszlo so he can do it later on. Okay.
Yeah,
And
that's fine.
And then we had a final question by Esteban. He wrote it on the chat. He said, thank you for your presentation. What do you think about the use of VR classes to treat your target of children? Is it advisable or not?
VR classes?
Yeah, virtual reality, I guess.
Okay. Well, we have done some initial trials with VR headsets that also have eye tracking in them. Basically, a lot of VR glasses do because it allows them to only render in high quality what you're looking at. And then you can basically render in lower resolution things that you're not looking at. So it saves calculation capacity. But we use those eye trackers then, of course, for controlling games. So we've done a first prototype, which is like a Temple Run or Subway Surfer game with a VR set. So we think there's definitely a lot of power there because the impact, let's say, and also adherence, talking about if kids want to play it, it's quite exciting to play it on a VR headset. The bad thing, of course, is that it's not omnipresent. And that's where mobile phones at the moment are still much more, that's everywhere. Every person, almost every person we would offer a solution to has a phone that can do what we want it to do. VR headsets are single digit population percentage. that's the problem. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Laszlo. Thank you all for joining today the Breakfast and Learn. We have already the question, Maria's question on the chat, so I will share it with you through email, and maybe you can draft a quick answer when you have time. Thank you all for your participation, and see you next month. Actually, Mats will be one of the speakers in December, so now you get the chance to see his face and hear his voice already. Thank you all, and see you soon.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.